Hello, America. Welcome to the Junto podcast, where we promote the practical applications of critical thinking and bold creativity. I am your host, Edgar Mills. Thanks for joining us. Hello, America, and welcome to episode 20 of the Junto podcast, and thanks for sticking with me. So, today we're going to talk about an unusual topic. We're going to talk about an old TV Western that I watch weekly that I thought was ahead of its time, and it was called Have Gun Will Travel. This show was groundbreaking, in my opinion. It ran from 1957 to 1963. So this was a time frame kind of before counterculture really suck in and the hippie culture of the 60s and things like that. And we're going to break it down into segments, and then we're going to kind of explore Paladin, the main character Paladin, and his the profound depth of the character and the sharpness of the character. And then for each segment, then we're going to see how the themes that we're talking about in the show, why it was ahead of its time, how that the themes kind of echo what's going on in modern social and political environment and personal issues and stuff like that. So what made the show pioneering? Have Gun Will Travel, I thought, was a trailblazing show, pun intended. The writers kind of skillfully merged Old West action with intellectual and sort of like cerebral exploration. They got into some fairly deep psychology on that show. And most of the acting and stuff, I mean, yeah, the show was a 60s show. It was a 50s and 60s show. There was still a little bit of, it was a television show. So they didn't go into kind of depth that movies go into and with like necessarily the acting. I thought the acting was good, but it was a little campy at times. But the psychology and the depth of intellectualism they got into, I think it was ahead of anything else in its time. Now, Wanted Dead or Alive was also pretty introspective. The character Josh Randall, yeah, he was a pretty complex guy. But so the creators of the show kind of fashioned. Paladin was portrayed by Richard Boone, and Richard Boone was he was a well-known actor. Well, he did a lot of westerns and stuff like that. He was also Heck Ramsey in an older series or a newer series. Well, newer compared to this one. But the Paladin, the main character of the show, was like a refined sort of gentleman gunfighter. He was like a dandy, right? He lived in a swanky hotel in San Francisco. Now, the time frame of this show was post-Civil War, probably 1870s and 80s is when this show was meant to be happening. So he was a bit of a dandy, right? When they showed him in the beginning of every episode, he's wearing very dapper clothes, very ornate and dapper clothing, and he's usually wooing some woman near a piano or in the luxurious lobby of this hotel that he lives in. But he was a gunfighter, right? That was it. And every episode he pulls out his business card, and it just said, "Have Gun Will Travel, Wire Paladin, San Francisco." It's pretty awesome. I've got some business cards made up, very similar to it. Anyway, and he charged, if somebody was wealthy looking for his services, and he charged them. But also he'd work for pro bono, really, for like poor folks, oppressed folks. And usually this stuff they developed throughout the episode. And this dynamic, though, this sort of mercenary for hire, gunfighter for hire dynamic, what it did was it facilitated like this just real profound analysis of like ethical conundrums, like real deep right and wrong and things like that, including justifications for violence and the desire, like Paladin always sought for a more peaceful and equitable resolution for these conflicts. And these themes got deeper than just the superficial shoot 'em up action of the cowboy pictures of the day, the hero and villain, where it was just very, very clear hero and villain. You know what I mean? Like it was that guy right or wrong or what? It was, yeah, it was kind of crazy. So these ethical issues, these conflicts, these ethical conflicts with sort of gray area right and wrong stuff, kind of puts me in mind today. What's the big ethical topic of today? And it's got nothing to do with gunfighting or anything like that. It kind of, I think there's a lot of ethical debates around AI right now, especially as it pertains to like warfare, combat, and then also local policing, right? Law enforcement. And then also where, the advancement of technology, the rapid, almost out of control advance of technology clashes kind of with the moral use of it. And it's getting scrutinized, but nobody's putting the brakes on it. And the reason nobody's putting the brakes on it is because for everything bad that you can probably imagine that AI is going to do, that you can also point out something good that AI is going to do. And, I can't say that I'm on either side or one side or the other completely because, yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's probably going to lead to a totalitarian surveillance state, I would guess. And speaking of that, I have said this before, but Atlanta specifically is the most surveilled city in America. Did you know that? How bizarre is that? And we'll get into that in another episode. So I always say to my wife, and she, I've been watching Have Gun Will Travel for all my life, but there's a streaming service called Pluto, and and Have Gun Will Travel is on there, and I watch 2 episodes every Sunday. At least 2. Well, normally 2. Bright and early Sunday morning, I'll watch 2 episodes just to put me in the right frame of mind there. But I always told my wife that Paladin he deals with complex social issues, man, that are complex even for today, but especially in 1957. And that series very cleverly engages with frictions in society, man. And they talked about back then. They talked about discrimination and marginalization of people, well ahead of when they became like real nationwide issues. And one of the writers of that show was Gene Roddenberry. And if you don't know, Gene Roddenberry, I'm pretty sure was the creator of Star Trek. And Star Trek had some sort of unique subject matter in there as well. Never mind all the science fiction and stuff. But they kind of wrote in these like allegorical narratives that they kind of champion the rights of the oppressed and disenfranchised populations. And on that show specifically, they talked a lot about Native American sort of marginalization. They talked a lot about immigrants and women's rights and religious minorities. And I don't remember so far an episode. I don't really remember much where they get into like the African American racism and stuff like that much. But again, I have not seen that entire series in its totality. I watch 2 episodes every Sunday, starting at season 1, maybe last year or something. And obviously I miss some Sundays. But I'm on like season 4, man. Like back in those days, a series for a season would have like 80 odd episodes. It ain't like these days where a season is like 12 or 18 episodes. Man, they were working back then. You know what I'm saying? On the studios and the sets in Hollywood, they had Western setups. Boy, they were filming nonstop, man. So, but yeah, they talked on issues about marginalized communities, and it's interesting to look at that now, to see it from that time, and this was prior to the civil rights movement and stuff like that. This was before that. Paladin was an educated man, the character, and he sometimes would, because they talked about anti-Semitism even back then, and he was proficient in Hebrew language, and he knew scripture of the Torah and the Bible. But Paladin dropped quotes in every episode from ancient philosophers, classic literature authors, biblical quotes, like deep quotes, not just one-liners. I mean, like some serious business. Back then, there was an episode addressing a female who was a physician. Yeah, a female doctor in the late 1800s. Amid this Wild West sort of patriarchal, angst over a woman doctor. You know what I mean? Crazy stuff like that. It was awesome. There was support for women's political aspiration. One of them was a woman was running for mayor in a place that was, out of control, and they tried to run roughshod over. So the plot lines, man, they were just so deep, and they kind of mirrored issues that existed in America at that time, but that persist today, though. Man, it's crazy. So let's connect that to today. There's ongoing conflict against, systematic or structural racism. There's conflict with the stringent immigration enforcement. Now, I happen to be for stringent immigration enforcement, but more so immigration reform. And then these days, I'm sure if Paladin existed today, he would somehow try to possibly, yeah, I don't know. Let me just get that framework. There was a lot of politics sort of intermingled with there, but it was usually local level stuff. There was a lot of issues of like bullying, right, going on there, which are things that go on today. Voter fraud. They talked about voter fraud back then. Because I've said this before, and I'll say it again, folks, I'm 100% sure that there has been voter fraud since there has been elections. You know what I mean? So, yeah. He talked about deep issues that are still persistent even today. So, Paladin himself, the character, and then the show, there was a sort of it had depth. It had intellectual depth, and it was witty. I mean, it was legitimately witty. And sometimes it was maybe a little sardonic. There was a lot of philosophical introspection on on ethics and behavior. And this sometimes in the Old West, this was before, some places before they were even really civilized. You know what I'm saying? Wild West rules still applied during this time frame. And the show really, really pushed reason and reasoned and ethical negotiations and dealing with people in a fair and equitable way, like on an individual level and from a sort of political level. It was I think it was a very libertarian show. I think we could draw some parallels to that. But they talked about, in Have Gun Will Travel, they talked about a lot of human interdependence, but also independence. And they did talk about the results and ramifications of prejudice. And this show was kind of looked at like, I also used to watch the Wild Wild West. And if you know what that is, it was a very, very campy, there was a lot of widgets and gadgets. It was like the cowboy version of James Bond, sort of. And I kind of compare it to, if you guys remember the old school Batman show back in that day, It was colorful and silly like that. But there was it was good guys versus bad guys, and the bad guys were always like kind of like James Bond villains, except from the Old West. It was good. Complete opposite of this. And so of the two, Have Gun Will Travel and the Wild Wild West, like Have Gun Will Travel was the adult Western. Do you know what I'm saying? And the episodes that Roddenberry wrote, there was a big emphasis on nonviolent conflict resolution and sort of moral conflicts, and you see that kind of stuff in the Star Trek seasons, where there was a lot of nonviolence, right? They tried to avoid violence at all costs. So yeah, there was some social commentary that was, without being overtly political, was very tangible. So yeah, I think, Have Gun Will Travel as well as Star Trek. Star Trek, I think if you guys remember, there was the first interracial kiss was on network television, was on Star Trek. So, and it wasn't a political context whatsoever, or even talking about racism. It was just an interracial kiss. And they sort of, you didn't see that kind of depth just on network television, man. You just didn't see it. So I think those shows specifically, Have Gun Will Travel, kind of paved the way for shows. Now these days, shows are very preachy about, not only did they start addressing, and making commentary on social issues, now they start kind of getting deep into how you should be thinking about them and the way you should start kind of preaching a little bit these days. It kind of gets out of control now. But today, society's polarized on almost everything, and that's just driven by friggin', like I talked on my last, misinformation. There's conflicts all over the globe right now. It's hard to really, with a straight face, as a politician, to talk about nonviolent conflict resolution when you're funding two wars right now. At least two wars that we know about, never mind the secret things. Mental health crisis, that's a big deal today. Guess what? They addressed that in those days. But the mental health crisis that we see today, and a plethora of things cause these mental health problems, just any number of things. They scratched the surface on that stuff then. And the way they do it is just so great. I said Paladin was a dandy. Well, he wasn't a dandy. He was an ex-military man, and he was very educated, and he was sophisticated, and he had depth. He had depth, but he had personality, and he was approachable. And you saw that in his demeanor and the way he talked to people. And he talked to the servants just like he talked to, the mayor or whoever. And that was kind of the centerpiece of the show, was just his charm. Yeah. Now, I'm not going to tout West Point, but that's his backstory, right? He was a Union cavalryman in the Civil War, a West Pointer, but throughout the show, man, he drops like scholarly wisdom on people, especially at the height of whatever moral conflict they happen to be in. And he carries a custom-made pistol with a chess piece knight sort of emblem on the butt of his gun and on the butt of his rifle and on his holster. And he dropped Shakespeare on people, and Milton and Aristotle, and biblical quotes from Psalms and the Old Testament, and blew people's minds. And one piece, he talks about Don's assertion of communal diminishment through individual loss, and to advocate empathy. Or he talks about Job's the the temper and the way Job before his trials, you know what I mean? Talks about his arrogance, it's so enlightening, man. It's so enlightening because even in, I don't know, I don't even watch that much TV these days. It's very, very, very little that I find just palatable, just entertaining, just thoughtful or anything like that. Because like I said, with the news outlets, everything is owned by someone. And that those people who own these production companies or these streaming services, they have agendas, and it shows in their shows today. But Paladin's intellectual depth, he would break them down in a relatable way. Just these huge, enormous, complex concepts, and he would apply them to the topic of the day or the dispute or the conflict that they were having, and he always pushed nonviolent resolution over violence. But very often in the show, he had to kill people. He was a gunfighter. He was a quick draw, and it was all that stuff. But he always attempted to go with the nonviolent resolution first, and the fair and equitable resolution first. And every time at the end of every episode, when he was riding away, man, the town was just left like in deep thought, examining themselves or the situation, and just left thinking like, man, what just went down here? That character in today's world kind of aligns with good leaders of today and good individuals of today who draw on ancient philosophy in order to empathize and to help others empathize, especially still we're dealing with racial disparities and sex disparities and things like that. But genuine leaders of today, you can see that their technique, they might have even taken inspiration from Paladin. For all I know, I did. And even now in my adulthood, I'm like, man, I would like to be like that, a real version of that. And on the range, I'm very adept at gun handling, but I want to be intellectually and philosophically smart enough to drop these nuggets of wisdom when it's appropriate. And we see that with people who, quality leaders. And look, I keep going back to libertarians. Ron Paul. I see that in Ron Paul, right? Because he looks at things in a fair and balanced way. And in modern issues like criminal justice reform, for instance, debates on mental issues and economic issues, and the Fed, Ron Paul, yeah. And, he looks at those things, and he has pragmatic ideas and based in profound philosophy. So you can see echoes of Paladin in some of the good leaders of today, for sure. And I know it might seem kind of superficial to kind of take inspiration from a television character, but look, and the media, and when I say the media, I mean like streaming services, anywhere you can consume movies and television shows and clips of this, that, and the other. Back in the old days on television, when television emerged in the late 40s and the early 50s, it was heroes and villains, and everybody had their hero, and the Lone Ranger and Hopalong Cassidy and Roy Rogers and stuff like that they were prominent. But the earlier ones they just didn't have the depth, man. They just didn't have the depth that Paladin has. So Have Gun Will Travel kind of changed the paradigm on the Western for sure by kind of intermingling and intermixing it with some like profound, intellectual and scholarly knowledge and insight. And that right there did leave an imprint. For instance, my wife watches a show possibly called Criminal Minds. It's got Joe Mantegna in it. I think it might be called Criminal Minds. And in that show, I don't care for the show, but they always drop a quote from some philosopher or some deep classic literature. And I think they probably draw that directly from Have Gun Will Travel. Now I happen to know, and here's why I put that really directly together. Joe Mantegna, if you guys don't know, he's a big a gun enthusiast and a Second Amendment advocate and a strong military supporter, and he's always on some gun shows. On some of the, you don't see the gun shows too much on live television anymore, but there's like American Rifleman and I want to say Guns and Ammo TV, and there's some shows out there that Mantegna has been on, and he's got a gun collection and all those things. So here's what I imagine: that Mantegna, as a youth, probably watched Have Gun Will Travel, and it relates today, and it shows in the simple act of them dropping some profound quote from some profound thinker. As far as so it was ahead of its time on the issues that it talked about. These days you can turn on any TV show and it's talking about whatever other issue, climate justice and whatever kind of social justice and geopolitics and this and that and the other. So everybody's trying to get in on it now. So you can either look back at Paladin as being a good influence and creating awareness, or being a negative influence that now every TV show is preaching something to you. So I encourage you to watch the show. Yeah, it's on Pluto on demand. Just Have Gun Will Travel. Reads the card of a man. And watch a few episodes. Start from episode 1, man, and see what you think. He wears black, and this was probably around the same time, or maybe just before, Johnny Cash became the Man in Black. And I think there might be a little connection there. But Paladin wears black. I don't know. The show's in black and white. And, if you see some old colorized photos, it's got kind of a blue tint to it, but he wears black, and it's pretty damn good. It's pretty damn good. He's a mercenary. He's a gun for hire, but every episode, he's in his hotel, playing cards, reading some literature, wooing some, lady sophisticate from wherever. And he will read an article in a paper that some small town in Missouri or whatever is having trouble with cattle rustlers or this and that. And then he will send a card and via telegraph or mail. And then he'll send messages and then he'll go show up in this town all by himself, all by his lonesome, meet whoever, the sheriff, or you'll see whatever conflict is kind of taking place, right? And then he'll interject himself. And a lot of times in this show, the people who hire Paladin to do a thing are oftentimes mistaken about his nature, and they think that he's literally just a gun for hire. But he's really, he's there to find the justice in it all. He does the right thing all the time, every time. And it's magnificent. It's magnificent. Even if he has to do something brutal. It's friggin' brilliant. Have Gun Will Travel. Richard Boone. Paladin, it was his name. Are there any... I'm not advocating you watch TV too much. I used to be very enamored with Hollywood, personally. Especially back in... Well, obviously I didn't live back in those days, but one of the things my dad, he loved movies, and he loved the old war movies and the old westerns, all the way up through, the John Wayne days and stuff like that. And I think there were lessons in some of those movies back then that the lessons there's no lessons these days. They're just very complex, trying to highlight some issue, or I guess sometimes movies that don't preach or don't have lessons to be learned are the better movies because it got so out of control. Do you know what I mean? But let's go back to a comparison of Have Gun Will Travel TV show to the Clint Eastwood spaghetti westerns. And I mean the early ones, Fistful of Dollars, A Few Dollars More, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Those, were they complex? Were they deeply complex? It depends on how you look at it and what perspective you look at it from, man. Because Blondie, he never had a name in any of those except Have Gun Will Travel, and he was just Blondie or Blonde. He was Clint Eastwood. He was the main character. He was technically the good guy, but he was like kind of emerged in that time, right? And so that was the mid to late 60s. So Paladin went off the air in 63. Now, Clint Eastwood did Rawhide, right? And that was hero, that was the struggles of cattlemen, getting herds across hard terrain, and then they would have problems with whatever town or whatever. And Rowdy Yates was, he was a young guy. Clint Eastwood was young back then. But I think Paladin might have been like one of the original anti-heroes. Well, not the original. If you look at different types of movies, you had a lot of the Humphrey Bogart type movies. He was kind of an anti-hero as well. But I think Paladin was really an anti-hero. And I think the spaghetti westerns picked up on that. And I think Clint Eastwood kind of built the anti-hero into those, where he was always a bounty hunter usually in those movies, which, has a negative connotation, especially amongst lawmen. But the general public, even now, if you say the word mercenary, people have a negative connotation with it. But he ultimately he did things for the good, right? If there was somebody in his proximity who was downtrodden, suffering, oppressed, being abused, or getting run roughshod over by the local bad guys, the local, thugs or local gang or whatnot, he would kind of he would kind of step in, become an obstacle for the local gang, and just create general havoc for them, alleviating the pain on the oppressed without directly saying, yeah, I'm a good guy here to help you. He would kind of inadvertently help them by not necessarily helping them, but becoming an obstacle for the real bad guys, So, and if you look at anti-heroes throughout other movies and throughout other genres, man, like, they're complex characters. Some of them are profoundly smart, and they have depth, and they have some psychological scars, and they've lost love or a child or whatever. Josie Wales, for instance, is one of my all-time favorite movies, The Outlaw Josie Wales. And if you know that movie, he lost his wife and kid to some the Union Redlegs, and he wasn't even fighting in the Civil War until the Redlegs came along, burned down his farm, killed his wife and son, and brutalized him, left him for dead. And he took up arms with the Confederacy, not for the Confederacy, just it was a convenient avenue to hunt down the Redlegs. And he was complex, man. And then at the very end, well, never mind the speech that he has with Tidbears, the Indian, which was friggin' deep, man. It was awesome. Listen to it again. When you're watching it and you go, oh, Clint Eastwood. But then that whole dialogue, well, actually monologue, between Tidbears and Clint Eastwood, and Clint Eastwood lays it out. I came here to die with you or live with you. Man, that stuff was deep. And he was a notorious outlaw. And it was only because, well, not only, I mean, he killed a lot of people, but it mainly was because they were either after him and his reputation grew larger than life. And he was profound. But at the end, another one of my favorites from that movie specifically is he's back at the bar in Silver Creek Canyon or something like that. He's back at this pub after having had gotten into some kind of gunfight, and a couple of bounty hunters come in, and he's kind of standing in the shadows, and one of the bounty hunters says, hey, I'm looking for Josie Wells. Well, we don't know him. He, whatever. And he goes back out, but he recognizes Josie Wells. And then he walks back in and he says, I had to come back. And Josie says, I know you did. But before you can traits, man, dying ain't much of a living. And he gives him a chance to leave, and the guy leaves. But then he comes back, says, I had to come back. And he says, I know you did. And then he blasted him. Yeah, and then at the very end, one of the main guys who was a Confederate guy with him, who then started working with the Redlegs to track Josie down, he came looking for him and he found him, but Josie was going under the name of Wilson, right? So this guy, Fletcher, he knows full well who Josie Wells is. And Josie Wells pretty much knows full well that he knows, right? He knows who he is. But they have a little, interaction at the end, man. And Fletcher was just like, look, if I had a chance to tell him anything, I'd let him know, hey, it's over. Just, nobody's looking for you anymore. Just let it be. And Josie was like, yeah, I reckon so. So, man, it was more complex than you might imagine. It was more complex. Now, Josie Wells didn't ride around dropping Aristotle on people or Shakespeare, but because he was a simple guy, he was a farmer, and basically driven, out of anger and revenge. But he was smart. He was very smart and clever. So from the Have Gun Will Travel into the spaghetti westerns and on, the anti-hero, man. That's what I'm dropping on you right now. I started out talking pretty much just about Have Gun Will Travel, but ultimately that's the anti-hero. The guy who doesn't go around touting his skill or his expertise or his profound knowledge. He just says it and uses it when it's called for in a way that that doesn't draw attention to himself. The anti-hero usually is always humble, man. Yeah. Always humble. It doesn't go to his head because he's experienced pain and loss and all these things, and he's been grounded. He's been humbled by pain and life. So when the anti-hero speaks, he's speaking from an experience that maybe we don't know. And he's speaking with some profound wisdom that was hard-earned. And, man, it sends the message so much better than just the hero-villain sort of stereotypes. Because heroes fall, folks. Heroes fall. We see it all the time. And I'm not talking about Marvel. Well, some of the comic books get deep. That's one of the reasons I liked, if you guys ever read or watched the movie The Watchmen, it was heroes, but they were all effed up, man. They had issues. they were kind of anti-heroes, and some of them not for the good. But heroes fall. We see it all the time when your favorite somebody or the good guy, the good deacon at your church or the good cop that gets busted for friggin' child porn or having relations with a 12-year-old girl and crap like that, man, or embezzling, and you find out that this person who you thought was perfect, which is partly on you, by the way, Nobody's perfect. And then you see them fall. With the anti-hero, they've already fallen, man. They're working from a place of low stature, of low humility. They're not heroes. They're not above anyone. They don't pretend to be. They don't care to be. They certainly don't care to be. The anti-hero is working from a place of humility, of lowliness, pain, maybe revenge. A lot of the stories that you see, that's kind of, the Punisher. The Punisher is purely revenge, purely vigilante revenge. And it gets gratuitous. It can be deep. The Punisher, if you read old comic books and look at story, it can be kind of deep. And then the violence and all that. Anti-heroes, don't always look for the violent answer. Always, it just comes that way. The anti-hero don't always look to enlighten people. You just kind of get it by default. Because, and here's my opinion, the anti-hero, he just lives who he is and is living an example, not wanting to be an example. He's an example and he doesn't want to be. He just is. And people who look a little deeper than just surface level, man, they see this, and it's profound sometimes. Sometimes once you go one or two layers deeper than just what's on the surface, then you see some really true greatness. So yeah, man, look at the guys who might be a little more complex. Now, Paladin and say Blondie or Josie Wells, they're not similar in a way that the way they interacted with people. Yeah, Paladin was an intellectual. He did dress nice and he did do rich guy thing. He had plenty of money, but it wasn't about money. That's one of the greatest things of his character is that money was irrelevant to him. Yeah, he charged $1,000 for a job. And imagine $1,000 in cowboy days in 1870, but half the time, he either didn't accept money, or if there was a sum of money involved in this conflict, some bank robbers or whatever, ultimately he would eventually distribute the money back to the downtrodden or whoever the victims, either direct or indirect victims were. And things like that, man. It was just so brilliant. So, yeah, he lived a sort of a flashy life when he wasn't working. But when he was working, yeah, he was all black. And it wasn't dandy at all. It was just black. And he kind of, he looked like a gunfighter. And that was it. And that was good because a lot of guys just mistook him for just a typical gunfighter. And it was just so much more than that. It was good. So I'm rambling now. Please watch it, man. If you, watch it. Give it 5 or 6 episodes, and you'll be hooked. And if you're not, tell me it was garbage. My analysis was all wrong. But I think it was one of the greatest TV shows out there. And yeah, so there's that. Give me the feedback, folks. Yeah, give me the feedback. I'm always eager, and I've only got, some of the folks listening have given me a little bit of feedback. I'm always interested, folks. I want to hear what you have to say. And because again, everything I say here is opinion. Literally, everything I say here is opinion. And the things I drop as fact are things that I truly do believe to be fact. And because I do check my work, I do check my work. So if you have differing opinions or there's something you feel strongly about, please hit me up. And if you want to write something about a topic, please send it, man. Send it. I will put it on the show, or not on the show, on the website, the djuntopodcast.com. I will put your blog or your essay on my blog section. Now, again, within the parameters of fairly good taste, don't, not a whole bunch of expletives unless it really you just have to have them to make the point, and throw it on there. And I'll do a disclaimer. Hey, this is from whoever or whatever screen name you want to use. Well, no, that's not true. I don't want anonymous stuff. I'll post it as anonymous, but I want to know who it's coming from, because I'm not just going to have a bunch of bizarre stuff just being sent in. But I do want feedback, good people. I do, because why do I want the feedback? Not to drive clicks or whatever. I want to essentially do my own AAR, my own after action review for myself to see if I'm hitting the mark or not. All right. So thank you for bearing with me on that breakdown of Have Gun Will Travel. I know it's not necessarily topical, but it kind of is. Pluto on demand. Okay, folks, what's coming up training-wise? Osprey Shooting Solutions. We have a couple of things in August, a pistol workshop, I want to say August 23rd, and a wildcard day, August 30th. September 1st, a Monday, Labor Day, we have an action pistol match. And we're going to run those with like USPSA style rules. And you can potentially win a free course out of that, or a free private session. And a friend of mine named Tim has taken lead on putting together some training, and he has enlisted the efforts of my friend Dennis at Force Solutions, and that's forcesolutions.co. And they are putting on a medical training class on 13 September. Correction, 20 September. It's a Saturday, September the 20th, from 8:30 to 5 p.m. Cost is $200, and this will take place in Rome at a training facility for the fire department in Rome. And registration closes on 13 September for this. And they will go over scene safety, carry methods, the way to carry your little IFAK or medical kit or your tourniquet, stopping the bleed or severe bleeding, airway management, shock, hypothermia, burns, and types of equipment to put in your little personal medical kit. All the equipment will be provided. You just bring a notepad and pen and be ready for a full day of training. I'm sure they'll break for lunch or have some snack time there. And again, that's my friend Dennis with Force Solutions. So please give that a look. And I've put that on all my socials, by the way. And then, folks, please go check out twoteamguys.com. I would like very much to sort of get that going with a little more volume than what we've done so far. We've got a land nav course coming with a small group here in August. We've got a bigger land nav course coming, hopefully in September, date yet to be determined. And that's the big one there. That's the 3-day. That's coming up soon. We have a situational awareness course, which is the academic portion of that is very robust. That's a 2-day course. That's 1 day in the classroom, and then that's 1 day in downtown Atlanta. Now, for those of you who are scared to go to Atlanta, don't be. I will be. I am there, vigilant, and I have people there and vigilant for your safety. Situational awareness. Yes, it's not a counter-surveillance class, but guess what? I get a lot of the foundations from counter-surveillance doctrine or anti-surveillance doctrine, and it will help you to be able to move about a little bit more safely in a city, in an urban environment, or even in a suburban environment, for that matter. And it's an excellent course. We have the Search and Rescue Mountaineer. Again, that's a great one. That's a 3-day. And that is what it says. Very technical search and rescue mountaineer. Skills will be taught there with teamwork and leadership as the thread. We have long-range evasion. Who knows what long-range evasion means? Well, yes, that's very much a sort of military-sounding term. But again, it's scenario-based, and you are meant to literally evade a opposition team who's out looking for you to find and capture you, right? So we start that out in Atlanta, in the city, and as a team, you have to move from your start point in Candler Park, and you will get to eventually Rome, Georgia, by different methods and different modes, and all the time trying to avoid being captured by surveillance teams. It's pretty awesome. I took that, folks. I created that course right out of the pages of the news, about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's a good one. And then we have a special mission skirmish. Now that it's meant to be sort of a primer for the small unit missions, but it's force on force, and it's two teams against each other trying to execute the same mission, trying to capture and exfil the same human. And it's meant to really give you an opportunity to, for all you tactical Timmies out there, give you an opportunity to see if your tactics hold up under some stress. And not only is it team against team, but then there's a unknown third party who will test your tactics. So it's kind of good, but it's meant to be more fun. It's meant to be more of a competition. And we provide the UTM ammo and bullets for that, and gun bolts for that. Or we can use airsoft guns with that. And then we have the small unit mission. And that is a fully immersive 2-day scenario where you're coming on as a member of a private security team. And this is a course that's going to challenge teamwork and leadership under sort of no-fail conditions. And you're going to train on some marksmanship, some live fire. You're going to train on some team SOP development. And you're going to sort of build your team SOPs. And you're going to train on time-sensitive planning. And you will make a plan and execute that plan under heavy time constraints. And you'll do the mission. And you will fail or succeed, and we will do an after-action report. Very teamwork oriented. And if you come out here as a corporate team, folks, if you are a big boss of a corporate team or division of some big company, and you come out here with your own people, what we do is we choose either the newest or I hesitate to say weakest leader of the team, but I will go out and say someone who might have some timid sort of characteristics, and we will put them in charge and give them the tools to be successful and lead and see how it shakes out. They might be in their zone, man. It might be the best mission ever. 8 minutes on the objective, bam, boom, get the people and move out. And they might miss their ride and not even make it to the objective. All sorts of tasks in there that help you with your time management, to help with supervision, and to help to lead, to get people to want to accomplish the mission. And then finally, we have a surviving captivity course that is, now folks, it's founded and it's rooted with U.S. Special Operations SEER doctrine, but it is designed very specifically for people, business people, and civilians who travel internationally often, and especially if you're in one of these NGOs, or if you're a church missionary, or if you're one of these salesmen with an ambitious company who's trying to get into a market that has yet to be really developed, and it's in the middle of some unstable region, and you want to send your salesman down there all by himself. This is designed for people who travel to places so that they are prepared, aware of the threats and wherever they're going, aware of how to sort of move about in that environment without bringing attention to yourself and without being the ugly American and that kind of thing. And the instructional portion of that and the presentation of that is, man, even if you just had that portion alone, it is just so valuable. It is just so valuable. And then you will have, some captivity there that you have to deal with as well. So that's what's going on. Please get into that stuff. Check that stuff out. All you need is a group of 4 or more people, and then we can set it up. We can sure set it up and get you going. So please check out the website, twoteamguys.com. And then, of course, the Junto podcast. For those of you who are listening, thanks for listening. Thanks for staying with me. If you like what you're hearing, please let me know. If you don't like what you're hearing, please let me know. If you got some issues you want to hear over the air, over the podcast waves, or that you would like to see a little bit of other perspective on, some research and some other perspective, reach out and let me know, because I'm always looking for topics and subjects to get into, because I love doing it. Okay, good people. I appreciate you. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks for staying with me. Be good to each other. Yep, be good to each other. All right. I love you guys. Take care. Be safe.